The dust hung thick in the air like a cloud of doom, swirling around Eliza Moore's feet as she stood motionless on the warped boardwalk outside Silas Crow's saloon. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long, distorted shadows across the deserted street of Red Hollow. It was a town built on broken promises, and tonight it was about to steal her future. Her brother Caleb's voice cracked in the distance, desperate and trembling as he signed away her life. The sound of the pen scratching against paper was a death knell she couldn't escape. Behind her, the door of the saloon swung open with a groan, and a figure emerged, tall and imposing. Silas Crow. His silver hair gleamed in the last of the daylight, his black broadcloth suit looking as expensive as the sins that had built his empire. He was a man who collected land, power, and women, and Eliza was his next acquisition. "Miss Moore." His voice was smooth, too smooth, like the oil running through the gears of a machine. "I believe congratulations are in order." Eliza's jaw tightened, but she didn't speak. Her brother had already signed the papers. There was no turning back. Crow had won, and with him, she would lose everything. Crow tipped his hat back, revealing eyes as cold and sharp as a knife's edge. He stepped forward, his boots striking the wood with a rhythmic precision, like a clock winding down. "The deal is done," he continued, his smile never reaching his eyes. "I'll send a carriage for you in the morning. We'll make it official." Eliza stood still, her hands clenched so tightly the nails dug into her palms. Her heart pounded in her chest, but her feet refused to move. She didn't run. Running wouldn't change anything. Now. A cold gust of wind swept through the street, lifting the corners of her dress and tugging at the hair escaping from her bonnet. She couldn't escape this, couldn't escape him. She turned her back to the saloon, and her eyes fell on Caleb, stumbling toward her, his face pale as death itself. Behind him, Crow moved with deliberate calm, his hands resting casually at his sides, like a man who knew he had already won. Eliza could barely look at Caleb. Her brother's betrayal stung worse than the cold wind on her cheeks. He had gambled away their family's future, and now she was the price. "Eliza." Caleb's voice faltered as he reached her. His eyes were downcast, unable to meet hers. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen. I thought I could win it back. I thought I could." "Save me?" she finished for him, her voice quiet but firm. "You've sold me, Caleb, for a debt you created. Don't talk to me about saving me." Her voice trembled despite her anger, but she forced herself to hold steady. She wouldn't let him see how much it hurt, how deeply his weakness had cut her. She had spent so many years trying to keep their little family together, trying to hold on to something that could resemble a life, and now she was nothing more than a bargaining chip in a man's game of greed. "Eliza, please!" Caleb pleaded, his hand reaching out to her, but she stepped back, away from his touch. "No," she said, her voice low but resolute. "I'm done. Don't follow me." She walked away from him, her steps slow but purposeful. The sounds of the saloon faded behind her, replaced by the steady thud of her boots on the weathered wood. She felt the eyes of the town on her, the whispers following her like shadows, but she didn't look back. She couldn't. The Moore cabin sat at the edge of Red Hollow, a small, sagging house that had once been filled with warmth and love. Now it was a hollow shell, just like everything else in her life. She had nothing left. No money, no home, no family. Only the weight of a future that had been stolen from her. Eliza paused on the front steps, the creaking wood beneath her feet, a reminder of everything that had slipped through her fingers. She could hear Caleb's frantic footsteps behind her, but she didn't turn around. She had nothing left to say to him. Inside, the cabin was eerily still. The cold stove sat unlit, the table bare, except for the few things she had left. Her mother's Bible, a silver locket that had once belonged to her grandmother, a few scraps of cloth she had mended, and a small leather satchel that contained her hopes and dreams. The dreams that had just been shattered. She set the satchel down on the table, staring at it as if it could offer her some kind of answer, some way out of this mess. But there was no way out. There was only what was coming. Eliza felt a sudden tightness in her chest. She could run. She could take what little she had left and disappear into the night, escape this town, escape the debt, and the man who now owned her. But where would she go? Crow owned the stage line, had men at every trading post. She couldn't outrun him. She couldn't outrun this. Her brother had sold her, and now there was only one choice left: to survive. She turned to the window, pressing her forehead against the cold glass. The sky outside was painted in hues of red and gold. The fading light, a reminder that everything she had known was slipping away. The saloon doors creaked, and Eliza flinched as a shadow crossed the street. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw him. A rider, tall and broad-shouldered, his silhouette framed by the setting sun. He was a stranger. And yet there was something about him, something in the way he moved, that made her stop and watch. He didn't belong here. She wasn't sure if that was a good thing or a bad thing, but as he drew closer, she could feel her pulse quicken. It wasn't just the man, though. It was the hope that perhaps, just perhaps, he was here to offer something more than a life bound by a debt she hadn't asked for. The door knocked sharply behind her. She straightened, wiping her hands on her apron, and opened it slowly. The stranger stood on her porch, dressed in worn denim and a weathered canvas coat, a hat pulled low over his face. He was lean, his dark hair tousled by the wind, and his eyes, gray, careful, studied her without judgment. "I'm Luke Barrett," he said, his voice low and even. "I'm here to offer you a way out. I've paid your brother's debt. You're coming with me." Eliza blinked, disbelief flashing across her face. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Luke didn't hesitate. "Because no one should be sold, not like this. You've got a choice. You can come with me, or you can stay here. But whatever you do, you won't have to go through with what Crow's planned." Her breath caught in her throat. A choice. A real choice. For the first time since she'd heard that gunshot echo through the town. But was he a savior, or another man with a price? Eliza stared at Luke Barrett, the words hanging between them like the weight of the world. For a long moment, she couldn't move, couldn't think. This wasn't supposed to happen. Men didn't offer help without a catch. They didn't walk into a town like Red Hollow, where everyone had their price, and offer freedom just because it was the right thing to do. She felt the familiar, heavy pull of fear in her chest. She'd been betrayed once. Could she trust another man, even if he stood there offering her what she hadn't dared hope for, her life back? "I'm not going anywhere with you," she said finally, her voice coming out firmer than she'd expected. "I don't know you. And you're not fooling me with some kind of charity. What do you want?" Luke didn't flinch, didn't take a step back. He just stood there, his face unreadable under the brim of his hat, his broad shoulders casting a long shadow over the porch. The wind picked up again, swirling dust at their feet, but his gaze never wavered. "I don't want anything from you, Eliza." "Not like that," he said. "Your brother owes me nothing, and I'm not here to take anything else from you. But Crow's a bastard who'll do whatever it takes to get what he wants. You're his next pawn. I'm offering you a way out. You don't have to go through with this." Eliza's heart pounded in her chest. She hadn't known she'd been holding her breath until the air rushed back into her lungs. Could she really leave? Leave everything she had ever known behind? Could she really trust him? Luke paused, as if reading her hesitation, and spoke again, softer this time. "You don't have to decide right now. But I can't stand here all night. If you want out of this mess, you have to come with me now. The carriage to Crow's place is coming first thing in the morning, and once you get on that train, there's no turning back." Quote. For a moment, Eliza didn't know what to say. Her life had been a series of choices made for her, the path shaped by the weakness of a brother who gambled away their future, the indifference of a town that turned a blind eye to her suffering. But now, here was this stranger, offering her a different kind of freedom, something she hadn't dared to dream about for years. "I'm not asking for your charity, Mr. Barrett," she said, her words firm but her voice shaking. "I'm not going anywhere with you just because you say it's the right thing to do. Luke took a slow step forward, his hand brushing against the porch post as he closed the distance between them. "Then come with me because you have a choice. Because you deserve better than to be sold off like cattle. You deserve more than a man like Crow." Eliza's breath hitched. It felt like the first honest thing anyone had said to her in years. She swallowed hard, trying to push back the emotion that threatened to break her composure. She had nothing left here, nothing but the weight of her family's mistakes, nothing but the memory of a place she had once called home, and now it was slipping away. "Why me?" she asked, her voice softer this time, almost to herself. "Why offer to pay for my brother's debt? You don't even know me." Luke didn't flinch at her question. His voice was calm, steady. "I'm offering you a way out because you deserve a choice. Because I've seen men like Crow before. They take what they want without caring who they hurt. And I've learned the hard way that sometimes you have to make your own path. You have to take control of your life, no matter what it costs." He paused, as if thinking about the words before speaking them. "I've spent my life working for everything I've got, and I'm not about to let a man like Crow take anyone else's future." Eliza felt a flicker of something close to hope, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. For a moment, she almost believed him, almost believed that a man like him, someone who spoke so plainly, so honestly, could offer her a chance to start over. But something inside her pulled back, the scars of her past biting at the edges of her thoughts. "I'll go," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but firm with resolve. "But not because you're offering me freedom, not because you're trying to save me." Luke nodded slowly, his eyes steady on her. "Fair enough," he said quietly. "You're making your own choice, not relying on anyone else. I can respect that." She took a deep breath, fighting the swelling emotions inside her. She could feel the weight of this decision pressing on her chest, but it wasn't just the weight of the choice. It was the weight of all the choices she hadn't been able to make until now. The choices that had been taken from her for years. "Where are we going?" she asked, the question coming out steadier than she'd expected. Luke turned slightly, glancing over his shoulder toward the horses that were waiting beyond the edge of the porch. "I've got a ranch about 40 miles north of here. You'll have a place to stay, work to do. You won't be alone." Quote. She met his gaze, and for a brief second, something unspoken passed between them. He wasn't offering her much, just a roof over her head, and work in exchange for her freedom. But for Eliza, it felt like more than that. It felt like a new beginning. "I'll need time to gather my things," she said after a long pause. Luke's face softened, his gaze understanding. "Take all the time you need. I'll wait." She turned to head back into the cabin, the door creaking as she entered. The small, worn room felt colder than it had before, the weight of everything she was leaving behind pressing down on her. The satchel, the dresses, the few remnants of a life that had been too easily erased. But as she moved through the cabin, grabbing what little she could carry, something inside her started to shift. For the first time in years, she wasn't just surviving. She was making a choice. A real one. When she emerged from the cabin, Luke was still standing on the porch, his back to the fading light. His presence felt solid, unyielding, like the earth beneath her feet. She approached him, the weight of her satchel light in her hands, and nodded. "I'm ready." Luke gave a single nod in return, his face unreadable in the dimming light. But there was something in his eyes, something she couldn't quite place, but something that made her feel just for a moment like she wasn't alone. Together they walked toward the horses. The sound of their hooves striking the dirt echoed in the silence, a steady rhythm that carried them both away from Red Hollow, away from the broken promises and into the unknown. The moon hung high in the sky as they rode through the night, the vast emptiness of the prairie stretching out before them. The air was cool, and the silence between Eliza and Luke was comfortable, though it pressed on her in ways she hadn't expected. For the first time in years, she wasn't running away from something. She was running toward something, though she couldn't yet tell what that something was. Eliza kept her focus on the path ahead, her mind swirling with too many thoughts to sort through. Every time she glanced over at Luke, her heart skipped in her chest, but she couldn't explain why. He rode with quiet confidence, his gaze fixed on the trail, his posture steady as the horse carried him forward. There was a strength in his silence, a steadiness that made her feel like maybe, just maybe, she could find some of that same calm within herself. After hours of riding, the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, turning the sky from deep purple to soft gold. The valley they were entering was still bathed in shadow, but the outline of the land was becoming clear, rolling hills covered in sparse grass, the occasional patch of wildflowers swaying in the breeze. The scent of sagebrush filled the air, sharp and earthy. Luke's voice broke the silence. "We're almost there." Eliza nodded without speaking, trying to gather herself. She had known when she made the decision to leave Red Hollow that it wasn't going to be easy, but now that they were almost to this new place, she wasn't sure what to expect. What kind of life would she find here? What kind of man was Luke really? As the sun rose higher, they rode down into a small, serene valley. The land seemed untouched, peaceful, the kind of place people came to for refuge, not conquest. It was hard to reconcile this tranquil place with the man she had left behind in Red Hollow. Luke guided his horse toward a low, sprawling cabin nestled at the base of a hill. A small barn stood beside it, and a few outbuildings scattered around the land. The house was modest but solid, with a wraparound porch and a stone chimney. A few cows grazed lazily in the pasture nearby, and chickens pecked around the barn. "This is it," Luke said, dismounting with ease and taking the reins of both horses. "Welcome to the ranch." Eliza swung down from her own horse, feeling the stiffness in her legs from the long ride. Her body ached. But the fatigue wasn't as overwhelming as she had expected. Something about the stillness of the place, the absence of the noise and chaos of Red Hollow, was already beginning to ease the tension she had carried with her for so long. She glanced around, taking in the open land, the mountains in the distance, the way the morning sunlight touched everything with a soft glow. It was beautiful. But it was also stark, empty in a way she hadn't been prepared for. There was nothing here to hide behind, just the land, the house, and the quiet rhythm of life that Luke had built. "You've done well here," she said softly, her voice tinged with something she couldn't quite name. Respect? Awe? Maybe both. Luke didn't look at her, but she could see the faint curve of his mouth as he walked toward the barn. "I had to. There wasn't much when I first got here. Took me a long time to make it what it is." Eliza followed him, feeling the weight of the quiet hanging between them. She wasn't sure what to say. She had no idea how to begin to fit into this world, this life that Luke had created. They led the horses to the barn, where Luke quickly set about unpacking them and getting them settled. Eliza stood back, watching him work, his movements methodical, efficient. There was a strength to him, but also a quiet humility that drew her in. When he was finished, he turned to face her, his gaze steady. "I've got to check the fence line before we get started. It's been a long ride for you. You can rest in the house if you want. I'll fix us something to eat when I get back." Eliza nodded, suddenly aware of how exhausted she really was. Her legs ached, and her mind was foggy with everything that had happened in the past 24 hours. But there was something in her that resisted the thought of sitting still, of doing nothing while Luke worked. It was as if being still meant she would stop running, and that was the last thing she wanted. "I'll come with you," she said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "I'll help. I'm not ready to rest yet." Luke raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. Instead, he gave a small nod and swung back into the saddle. "Suit yourself. We'll take a quick ride to the far fence and check the cattle." The ride was short, but the land seemed to stretch on forever. The open fields and rolling hills were breathtaking, but there was something sobering about the isolation. Eliza had never been this far from town, never been so alone. Even in Red Hollow, she had always known there was someone watching her, someone judging her, someone who knew her story. Here, there was only the land and the man beside her. There was no escape from the silence. They reached the far end of the property, where the fence line was starting to sag. Luke dismounted, grabbing tools from his saddlebag and setting to work. Eliza stood back, her arms crossed as she watched him, the sun now high in the sky and beating down on them both. The heat made her skin itch, but it also made her feel alive in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. "Why are you really doing this?" she asked suddenly, the question slipping from her lips before she could stop it. "Paying my brother's debt, bringing me here. What do you get out of it?" Quote. Luke didn't look up from his work, but she could see the faint tightening of his jaw. For a moment, he was silent. Then he spoke in a low, even voice. "I'm doing it because I don't believe in people getting treated like property. I don't believe in men like Crow getting to decide someone's worth." He paused, glancing up at her. "And I'm doing it because I know what it's like to be stuck in a life you didn't choose, one that feels like it's slowly suffocating you. No one should live like that." Eliza's heart skipped a beat. The sincerity in his voice was undeniable. For the first time since meeting him, she wondered if there was more to Luke Barrett than just a stranger offering a deal. "Thank you," she said softly, surprising herself with the gratitude in her voice. She wasn't used to being thanked, wasn't used to having someone else show her kindness without asking for something in return. But there was something different about Luke, something she couldn't quite explain. He nodded without looking at her, his attention focused on the task at hand. But when he spoke again, his voice was softer. "You don't have to thank me. You're not here because of charity. You're here because you chose to be. You chose to step away from everything that was holding you back." Eliza didn't know how to respond to that. She had chosen. She had chosen to walk away from a future that had been decided for her. And she had chosen to step into the unknown, to trust a stranger, to rebuild her life from the ground up. But as the sun rose higher, she realized something else too. This wasn't just about survival. This was about living, about choosing a life that she wanted, instead of one that had been handed to her without her consent. And for the first time in a long time, Eliza felt the faintest stirrings of hope. The days blurred into one another after that first ride. The ranch became a routine, a rhythm Eliza could settle into, though it wasn't easy. Every morning, she woke with the sun, helping Luke with the chores that kept the ranch running. The chickens needed feeding, the cattle checked, the garden watered. The work was hard, but it was honest. And slowly, Eliza found herself in a way she hadn't expected. She wasn't just a stranger in a new place anymore. She wasn't just running from her past. She was becoming part of something. This ranch, this life, this quiet, hard existence that was strangely freeing in its simplicity. But even as the days passed and the land beneath her feet began to feel more familiar, Eliza couldn't shake the nagging unease that came with being so far from the town she'd known. Red Hollow, with all its dirt and betrayal, was still a part of her, still haunting her even from a distance. She couldn't forget Caleb. Her brother's face haunted her, his betrayal still fresh in her mind. But there was something else now. As the days turned into weeks, she began to notice the tension in the air, the way Luke's hands tightened when he spoke of Crow, the way his voice hardened whenever the conversation turned to what had happened in Red Hollow. Luke had never spoken much about himself, but there were moments, small moments, when his walls cracked just enough for Eliza to see the pain beneath. When he thought she wasn't looking, his eyes would darken with a shadow of grief, a flicker of something she couldn't understand. And though he was kind to her, respectful in his quiet, no-nonsense way, there was something else in his presence, a burden he carried alone, a secret that weighed on him more than he let on. One evening, as the sun sank below the horizon and the stars began to rise, Eliza sat on the porch, watching the sky darken to the color of bruise and dust. The cool evening air was heavy with the scent of sagebrush, and she felt, for the first time in weeks, the weight of everything that had happened. The weight of her brother's death. The weight of Luke's unspoken words. Luke had gone to check the cattle after dinner, and Eliza had stayed behind, her mind too restless to rest. She leaned back against the porch post, closing her eyes for a moment, trying to quiet the thoughts racing in her head, but they wouldn't be silenced. Not yet. It was then that she heard the soft crunch of boots against the dirt. She opened her eyes, and there, standing a few feet away, was Luke. He didn't speak right away, just stood there, his hands resting on the worn wood of the porch railing, his back to her. "Eliza," he said finally, his voice low, but there was something in it that made her turn toward him. "Luke?" Her voice came out quietly, unsure of what to expect. He took a step forward, then another, his face shadowed in the dim light of the lanterns. He looked different. Something about his posture, the tension in his shoulders. The way his jaw was tight, like he was holding something back. "I need to talk to you about something," he said, his voice rough, almost reluctant. Eliza sat up straighter, her heart picking up speed. She hadn't seen him like this before. Normally Luke was steady, unflappable, but now there was a certain rawness to him, a vulnerability that unsettled her. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice steady despite the sudden flutter in her chest. Luke exhaled slowly, turning to face her fully. His eyes met hers, but there was something in them, a flicker of old pain, of regret, that made Eliza's heart skip. "I've been running from my past for a long time," he said softly, almost as if speaking to himself. "And I thought I could keep it buried out here, out in the middle of nowhere. But it doesn't work that way. You can't outrun it." Eliza frowned, confusion creeping into her expression. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, as if weighing his words carefully. "I've made my share of mistakes, Eliza. Some of them I can never fix. Some of them." He stopped, and she saw the way his eyes hardened, the way his shoulders tensed, as if he was preparing for something. "Some of them are coming for me. For both of us." Eliza felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. "What are you talking about?" "Who's coming for us?" Luke's face was shadowed in the dim light of the porch, but Eliza could see the way his expression tightened, the way his jaw clenched. "I've been hiding out here for a reason," he said, his voice low. "Crow's not the only one I've pissed off. I made a deal with a man once, a man who doesn't forget, no matter how far you run." He paused, then looked at her, his eyes full of that same sorrow she'd seen earlier. "I owe him, and sooner or later he'll come to collect." Quote. Eliza's heart sank. "What does this have to do with us? What does it have to do with me?" Luke turned his back to her again, running a hand through his hair, his movements tense. "You don't have to be involved in this, Eliza. It's my mess, not yours. But I'm telling you now because I need you to understand that there's more at stake than just this ranch. There's more at stake than just surviving here." Eliza's chest tightened. "Luke," she said softly, standing up to walk toward him, "you've given me a chance to rebuild my life. You've given me more than anyone else ever has. I'm not just going to walk away from you now." Luke looked back at her then, his eyes wide with surprise. "You're not a burden, Eliza," he said, his voice softer than before. "But I can't protect you from everything. I don't want you to get caught up in something that isn't yours to fight." She stepped closer, her heart thundering in her chest. "I've fought my whole life, Luke. I'm not afraid to fight for what matters." For a long moment, Luke said nothing. He just stared at her, as if trying to read her, to understand her. Then, with a slow, almost reluctant movement, he reached out, his hand brushing against her arm. His touch was light, but it was enough to make Eliza's breath catch. "You're not like anyone I've ever known," he said softly, his voice thick with something Eliza couldn't quite place. "I don't want to lose you. I don't want to see you hurt." She looked up at him, her heart racing, and for a fleeting moment she saw something in his eyes that made her chest tighten. But before she could say anything, he turned away again, his face hardening as the moment passed. "I'll handle it," he said, his voice flat. "I'll make sure no one comes for you." Eliza opened her mouth to respond, but the words caught in her throat. She didn't know what to say, didn't know how to make him understand that this was her fight too. Instead, she stepped closer to him, her fingers brushing against his arm, just enough to make him pause. "You don't have to fight alone, Luke," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "We're in this together." Quote. He turned to face her, his eyes meeting hers with a depth she hadn't expected. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The night seemed to stretch on around them, the air thick with something neither of them could name. Then Luke's expression softened, and he nodded slowly, a small, almost imperceptible smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "You're right," he said softly. "We are in this together." And for the first time since they had met, Eliza believed it. They were a team now. Two people bound by circumstance, by survival, and by something stronger than either of them had expected. The tension between them seemed to hang in the air like a storm waiting to break. The days following that conversation were filled with a quiet intensity. Luke kept busy, as always, working the land, checking the cattle, mending fences. Eliza kept busy too, finding her place in the rhythm of the ranch, learning the ins and outs of farm life. It was exhausting, but in a way, it felt grounding, something she hadn't had in years. But there was a weight in the air. Both of them carried it, but neither of them spoke about it. The danger they both felt, the danger they both knew was coming, hovered just beyond the horizon like a shadow creeping closer with each passing day. Eliza had been helping in the garden one afternoon when she saw the rider. At first, she thought it was just someone passing through, someone with business in the area. But as the rider came closer, she saw the familiar black hat, the dark coat, and the tall figure atop the horse. Her heart skipped a beat. It was Crow, the man who had already tried to claim her, who had bought her brother's debt as easily as any other commodity, was back. And this time, there was no escape. Liza's breath caught in her throat, her fingers tightening around the garden hoe she'd been holding. For a brief moment, her feet refused to move. Her mind screamed at her to run, to hide. But she knew that wouldn't help. She couldn't run anymore. She wouldn't. Her gaze locked with Luke's as he appeared from the barn, his eyes sharp and calculating as they met hers. He didn't need to ask what was happening. He could see the tension in her face, the fear that flashed across her features before she forced it down. "Stay inside," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. "I'll handle this." Eliza opened her mouth to argue, but one look at Luke told her it would be futile. He was already walking toward the barn, his steps long and steady. His hands were already reaching for his rifle, the weight of the weapon familiar to him. She wanted to call out, to stop him, but she didn't. She couldn't. Instead, she stayed where she was, standing frozen in the garden, her heart thumping in her chest as the sound of hooves grew louder. She forced herself to breathe, forcing herself to be still. It wasn't long before Luke was face to face with Crow. The two men stood across from each other in the yard, silent for a moment, sizing each other up. Crow's dark eyes gleamed with the same cold calculation Eliza had seen in Red Hollow, and yet there was something different this time. He wasn't here to offer her a marriage contract. This time, he was here to take what he wanted, and he wasn't going to back down. "You've been keeping her here, Barrett?" Crow said, his voice smooth, almost mocking. "And for what? A little piece of land? A little false sense of security?" Luke didn't flinch. He stood tall, rifle slung over his shoulder, eyes narrowed but steady. "She's not yours to claim, Crow. You know that." Crow chuckled darkly, the sound sending a chill down Eliza's spine. "Not anymore, you mean. I've settled the debt, Barrett, and I'll be taking what's mine. Your little arrangement doesn't change that." Luke took a slow, deliberate step forward, his eyes never leaving Crow's face. "She's not yours, Crow. You lost your claim to her the moment you took her brother's life. And now I'm telling you, this ranch, this land, this woman, they're all mine." Crow's smile faltered, and for a brief moment Eliza thought she saw something dangerous flicker in his gaze. He wasn't used to being denied. He wasn't used to someone standing up to him. But he recovered quickly, his smile returning like a mask. "You're delusional," Crow said softly, his voice slipping into that familiar, cruel calm. "You think I won't come for you? You think you can stand here on this dirt and refuse me? I've taken far more than you can even begin to understand, Barrett. And now I'll take this. You're just another obstacle to remove." Eliza's pulse raced, her hands trembling as she clutched the edge of the porch. Luke didn't move, didn't flinch. There was no anger in his stance, no rashness. He was a man who had learned to pick his battles, and he wasn't about to let Crow take what didn't belong to him. "I don't care what you think you own, Crow," Luke said evenly, "but I know this. If you try to take her, If you try to take this ranch, I'll make you regret it. I'll make it cost you more than you could ever imagine." The air between them thickened. Eliza felt every second stretch into an eternity as the two men stood, locked in a silent battle of wills. Crow's eyes flickered to the rifle in Luke's hands, then back to the man standing before him. Finally, Crow spoke, his voice low and dangerous. "You really think you can stop me, Barrett?" Quote, "I don't need to stop you," Luke replied, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "I just need to make you leave." The words seemed to hang in the air, their weight sinking deep into Eliza's chest. This was the moment. This was the moment where the world would change. The power was shifting, slowly but surely. Luke wasn't just fighting for a piece of land. He wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for Eliza. He was fighting for something more. Crow's gaze hardened, but instead of drawing a weapon or making a threat, he did something Eliza hadn't expected. He smiled. "I'll be back, Barrett," he said quietly, his voice carrying a dangerous promise. "This isn't over." And then, with a flick of his reins, Crow turned his horse and rode away, disappearing into the distance as quickly as he had come. The weight of his presence, of his threat, lingered in the air. But for the first time since she had arrived at the ranch, Eliza felt something different stir within her. Luke turned, his eyes meeting hers, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, though. It was something else. It was a quiet understanding, a moment of shared resolve. "You okay?" Luke asked, his voice soft as he came closer. Eliza nodded, her chest tight but her voice steady. "I am now." Luke's expression softened, his hand reaching out as if to touch her, but he stopped himself just short. He wasn't going to break the fragile thread of space they had created between them. But in that moment, neither of them needed words. They both understood what was at stake. Crow had made his move, and now Luke was ready to fight for everything he had built. For the first time since coming to this ranch, Eliza felt like she was truly part of something. Something that mattered. Something worth fighting for. And together they would stand against whatever came next. The days after Crow's visit were heavy with anticipation, each one stretching longer than the last. Eliza and Luke worked side by side, their movements almost mechanical, as though the world around them was on the brink of breaking apart. Despite the calm of the ranch, an undercurrent of tension hummed through everything. Every sound, every glance seemed to carry the weight of what they knew was coming. Luke was more distant than usual, his thoughts clearly preoccupied with the looming threat. He spent hours in the barn, working the land with an intensity that Eliza had come to recognize as his way of handling fear. But despite his silent determination, she could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the way his shoulders slumped when he thought no one was looking. Eliza felt it too, the waiting, the not knowing when Crow would make his next move. But there was something else beneath her own unease, something deeper than just the fear of losing the ranch. It was the strange feeling that had been growing between her and Luke, the growing connection she couldn't ignore. Every day she saw more of the man beneath the walls, more of the care he put into everything he did, the way he tended to the land as though it were his family, the way his hands, rough and calloused, worked with a steadiness that calmed her in ways she hadn't expected. And there were moments, fleeting but undeniable, when their eyes would meet, and something unspoken would pass between them. It was a dangerous thing, she knew. A partnership born out of necessity and survival was never meant to bloom into something more. And yet, there it was, a soft, quiet bloom she couldn't ignore. Luke didn't talk much about his past, but every now and then, a glimpse of it would break through. When he was alone, when the weight of the day had taken its toll, when he thought no one was watching. In those moments, Eliza saw the scars of a man who had fought battles far beyond the land, battles of the heart, battles of the soul. It was on a late evening, just as the last of the light was fading from the sky, that the storm finally broke. Eliza had just finished dinner, her body aching from the day's work, when the distant sound of hooves reached her ears. She froze, her heart skipping a beat as the familiar rhythm of the galloping horses grew closer. She stood by the window, looking out at the darkening sky, her breath catching in her throat. Luke stepped into the room just as the sound of the riders grew louder. His eyes locked with hers, and there was no mistaking the look in his gaze. This was it. This was what they had both been waiting for. "Stay inside," Luke said quietly, his voice steady, though his hands were already reaching for his rifle. "I'll handle this." Eliza's chest tightened, but she didn't argue. She didn't have to. She knew the drill by now. There was no room for hesitation, no time for doubt. This wasn't just about the ranch anymore. This was about survival. This was about standing together. She watched as Luke stepped outside, his silhouette framed by the dim light of the porch. He walked toward the barn, moving with the same quiet intensity she had seen the day he first arrived. The hooves were closer now, and she could feel the tension mounting, the air crackling with the promise of confrontation. Eliza turned toward the door, her fingers brushing the cool wood of the rifle resting against the wall. She hesitated, then grabbed it, her hands wrapping around the familiar weight of the weapon. If she had learned anything since coming to the ranch, it was this. She was no longer someone who could stand by and watch. She was a part of this fight, and she would stand beside Luke no matter what. She stepped onto the porch just in time to see Luke face off with Crow and his men. The rider in the lead, dressed in the same black coat and wide-brimmed hat, was unmistakable. Silas Crow. The sight of him, riding in like he owned the land, made Eliza's blood boil. She clenched her jaw, her hands trembling as she gripped the rifle tighter. This was the man who had threatened everything she had worked for, the man who had tried to buy her life like it was nothing more than property. And now, he was here, making his final move. "You've come a long way to die, Crow," Luke said, his voice low but steady, the rifle resting against his shoulder like an extension of his body. Crow chuckled, the sound grating in Eliza's ears. "You think you can stop me, Barrett?" He looked down at the rifle in Luke's hands, a smirk playing at the corner of his lips. "You've got a lot of fight in you for a man who's been living like a hermit in the middle of nowhere." "I don't fight for just me," Luke said, his voice cold now. "I fight for what's mine." Crow's eyes flickered toward Eliza, who stood at the edge of the porch, the rifle in her hand steady despite the fear rising in her chest. "She's not yours, Barrett. You can pretend all you want, but in the end, she belongs to me." Eliza felt her chest tighten at the words. No one was going to take her from this place. No one was going to take her from Luke. "You don't get to own anyone," Eliza said, stepping forward, her voice loud and clear. "Not me, not anyone." Crow's smile faltered for just a moment. Then he straightened in his saddle, his gaze cold as ice. "You really think you can stop me, girl?" "I don't need to stop you," Eliza said, her voice steady. "I just need to make you leave." Quote. There was a long, heavy silence as Crow studied her, his cold eyes narrowing as if he were deciding just how serious she was. And then, with a sharp flick of his reins, he turned his horse, the other two riders following his lead. "I'll be back, Barrett," Crow called over his shoulder, his voice low, a promise of things to come. "But don't worry, next time you won't get so lucky." Luke didn't lower the rifle until the riders had disappeared over the horizon, the sound of hooves slowly fading away. He stood there for a moment longer, his eyes on the distance, before he turned back toward Eliza. "Well," he said, his voice quiet but with a hint of something. "Relief, maybe. Or resolve. That's one battle won." Eliza lowered the rifle, her heart pounding in her chest. She hadn't realized how tightly she had been holding her breath until now. She stepped down from the porch, her legs shaking from the adrenaline, and walked toward Luke. "We're not done, are we?" she asked, her voice soft but sure. Luke met her gaze, his expression hardening again, the weight of their reality settling in. "No, we're not, but we'll face it. Together." Eliza nodded, feeling a calm determination fill her. She didn't know what was coming next. She didn't know how this would end. But for the first time in a long time, she knew this. Whatever happened, they would stand side by side. They would face it together, no matter what came next. The future was still uncertain, but one thing was clear. She wasn't running anymore. She was staying, and nothing was going to take that away from her.